Welcome to another episode of Electrotechnology on the Job. And in this episode, we are continuing on the work that we were doing in the last episode, where we had to do all of the conduit for a deck. So let's have a look and see where we're up to. Okay, so here we are back at the deck where we were doing some conduit work. As you can see behind me, the deck has been complete. I've installed the light, the floodlight fitting, and I've connected up to the circuit. So it's now all live and working. However, there is still a little bit left to do, and they want some lights all around the deck. Originally, I thought this was going to be a little bit of a hard job because it was going to require running cabling through deck and up through posts, etc. But they have decided to do something a little bit different, which now makes the job really easy. All I actually need to do is run a little bit of conduit and connect a GPO, and the lights they've chosen just plug straight in. And the GPO we're going to use is one of these. This is an external GPO. It's rated for water resistance, so it can be mounted outside, the rain can hit it, and the water doesn't get in. It's got a seal and the outlets are underneath so that the water can't go back upwards. It's just going to drop off like that. When we put this together, you'll see in the back that it's already got wires there. So basically all we do is we strip these wires back, connect our wires in, and then put it into the terminal strips, and that's it. Those two GPOs will work. Now, because this is on a light circuit, I am still running 1.5mm cable, which means this GPO can never be used for anything other than the lights. So I will have to make sure I identify that by writing on it that it's for the lights only, so that the people know not to plug anything else into it. Also, the mounting block that it comes with only has 25mm conduit terminators. Now, I've run 20mm conduit. So if I were to put my 20mm conduit into these, it's going to be a little bit loose. So I'm going to use this. This is what we call a reducer, where the outside surface area is 25mm and the inside surface area is 20mm. And it goes on the end of the conduit, just like a coupling, but it's a little bit shorter. And then we'll plug in a little bit of glue and away you go. That's all there is to this job. So I'm going to show you a little bit of what I've done previously since the last episode, and then we're going to get on to putting this on. Let's do it. Okay, so this is the light post that I've installed, and all I did was bring the conduit up from the bottom. So let's have a look. So here you can see I've come along with the flexible conduit and I've gone into the post that is bolted to the decking, and the conduit then goes up through that post up to the switch and then up to the light fitting to connect it on. So that was a fairly simple thing to do. It just required drilling a hole into the post and passing the conduit through. Here is the switch that we connected up last time, and we have put the conduit on the top now, and the cables run through here and then up to the contact point up the top. And now when I turn on the light over on the deck, that now works. This is a switch that we are going to work on today. So we're going to extend the cabling and we're going to put our GPO so it actually switches. So this job simply requires us to connect into the adaptable box that we put on last time, run a conduit all along this timber around the perimeter of the deck to the point where we need to put the GPO, and we screw the GPO to the timber, run the cables and connect it up. It's really that simple. It shouldn't take us too long. So unlike when I did this before, this time when I run the conduit, I'm not going to take the cable off the roll. I'm not going to unroll it and cut it to length. I'm going to leave it on the roll so that I can get it the exact length as I'm going, and then I can connect it in towards the end. So that's what I'm going to do. Remember, when gluing your conduit, always check to make sure you got the writing on the underside so you can't see it once it's all mounted up, because once it's glued, it's not going to move anywhere. Okay, now I've put that saddle in. It's not perfectly straight, and I'm not concerned about that at the moment, because I'm going to do the other ones and I'm going to come back and reposition this one. This is simply just to hold it in place while I mount everything else up. Again, I put another saddle on the other end just to hold it in place. Now I can get everything nice and level and straight and looking good. Always utilize your pockets. Good idea if your pockets have a flap that goes over the top, because that way it stops things falling out when you're bending over or climbing through roofs or small spaces. Pockets. Always take a step back, have a look from a distance to make sure you're happy with your conduit. It's never going to be 100% straight, but if you can get it as straight as possible, it's going to look better, more professional. Okay, that's not bad. I've got a couple of brackets here that are kicking it out a little bit. There's nothing I can do about that. So that's going to have to stay the way it is. It's not 100%, but it's fairly close. Sometimes you have to make compromises. Okay, I'm going to continue on around the perimeter of the deck and do the same thing up until the point where I've got to put the GPO on. So at this point, I've got a bend here. So I'm just going to use the conduit spring and I'm going to bend the conduit to fit the profile of the decking and run it along, cut it off. And then I've got a little bit of awkward stuff to work around, and I'll use some flexible conduit to do that part of the job. But for most part, if I can bend it with the rigid conduit, it's going to look better and it's going to be a more solid fixture. So let's bend. There we go. I'm now going to line this up, see how it looks, and if I'm happy with that, I will take it off, measure this end, cut this end off, mount it up, running my cables through. Always work with your spring still in the conduit until you've got that bend where you want it to be. If you take the spring out, you can't rebend it. Okay, my conduit's bent and it's cut to the correct size. At this point, I'm going to pull my cable through, but now I want to pull much more cable through. In fact, I'm going to pull all the cable I need, because at the end of this is where my extension with my flexible cable's going to go, flexible conduit's going to go, and it's only a couple of meters anyway, it's not very long. That way I know that if I leave it, just pulling little bits through, what's going to happen when I hit that flex, it's going to be really hard to pull all the cable through the flex and around any other bends. So if I pull it all out here now, then run it through there, it's just going to make my life a little bit easier. And after all, that's what we want. Make life easy. Whenever you're doing connections with conduit, always put saddles either side of your joints. That way they can't ever come apart. So when I was doing this one, I actually moved my saddle back a little bit because I know I'm going to put another one here on that joint. I'm currently using these screws. These are specific for treated pine because that's what this is made out of. And I hate them. They're rubbish. They keep coming off my drill. Really annoying. But I have to work with them. Always put saddles around your bends as well. Same reason as before. Keeps it in nice and tight. If somebody bumps it, not going to come loose. So keeping with my idea of using rigid as much as possible, I've got to do some flex conduit work here, up and around. And at this point here, I'm going to use the rigid, but I do need to do a slight bend over on this side. So I'm just going to do this quick bend, get that ready, and then run my flex, mount it all up. And then we'll be ready for the GPO. Now this is going to be a slight S bend. So what I'm going to do, I've got my mark on the conduit. I'm going to run my spring just a bit further down because I'm going to bend it here, then I'm going to bend it there. So this will be a little bit different. It's just not going to be one bend, it's actually going to be two bends, but it's only a very small one. Sometimes if you find the spring doesn't go into the conduit very well because for whatever reason, you can just give it a shake like that and down it will go. And then hits that point where you've bent the wire so that you know that it's in the right spot and hasn't gone any further past that. There we go. Now there's my S bend. That is probably a bit too much, so I'm just going to flatten that out a little bit. There we go. That's probably about right. We'll have a look at that and adjust it if need be. Okay, now I'm just going to cut it to length, put it aside, do the flex, add this on, add the GPO on. Now in this case, I'm going to do a bit of a dry run, which means I'm not going to put the cable in because I want to really get this length right, so I don't have to muck around later on. Remembering always pushing down with our cable into our conduit. Gravity is your friend. Make your life much easier. Now, because this is flexible conduit and I'm trying to go around some curves, you've actually got to use more saddles. Remember, the whole purpose of saddles is to making sure that the conduit can't come off, can't be bumped and broken. So you need to put saddles fairly close together. And with flex, you need it closer because otherwise there'll just be bits dangling around the place, which is not good. One other tip, as disgusting as this tip may be, if you want your screw, whatever type it is, to sit on the end of your battery drill and not drop off when you are holding it, you simply just put a little bit of spit on it. And I don't mean like that. What I mean is just literally put your tongue on it and that will put it on, and now it doesn't fall off. Brilliant. Now, you'll probably notice what I did then was I actually took the last saddle I put on off again. And that was just so that I could maneuver this around a little bit easier because it was a little bit too tight. That's something we do quite often. Don't be afraid to take those saddles off, move things around, put them back on again. So I just needed to do that to fix this up. Now I'm going to put those saddles back on and work my way that way. I could have run my flex along here and then just gone that way. And you know, that probably would have been a little bit easier. Probably would have saved me about 5 minutes worth of work, maybe 10 minutes worth of work. But doing it this way, it keeps the conduit out of the way. So again, it's a little bit more protected because it's sitting underneath this timber. So it's again, just a little bit of a better job to do it this way if you can. A lot of the, well, I don't want to say dodgy guys, that's wrong. But a lot of electricians you'll see will just try and get in and do things as quick as possible so they can get to the next job. And you know, that's fair enough. That's how their business works. I try to stick on the idea of quality, always thinking ahead, trying to think about, you know, can this get damaged in the future? You know, what can I avoid? What can I do to avoid getting it damaged? You know, and again, just trying to do a little bit more of a neater job. It might take me a little bit extra time, but you know, if I do that, I'm going to get called back more often, I think, than somebody who just slaps it together and walks away. So, something to keep in mind. Okay, to get this out here, this end cap, basically all I'm going to do is take my screwdriver and force it out. Now, it doesn't really matter which way this goes up. It's just a mounting block, really. So just choose the side and there we go. Pops out. There, we're done. Now I can connect it up, glue it, and ready to do the GPO. So what I'm going to do with this is I haven't glued the mounting block into the conduit. I'm going to screw this, get this pretty much where I want it, then I'll take it off, glue it, and then put it back on, because once I do add that glue, it's going to dry pretty quickly, and if I've got it in the wrong spot, well, it's going to make my life a little bit difficult. I really, really hate these screws. You'll notice I'm using the speed 1 on my battery drill. I generally use speed 2 all the time, but these screws are just so rubbish. I have no choice. Excellent. Time to wire the GPO in. Now, I'm going to connect this GPO now. I haven't connected the other end. Always do the live end last. That way, you reduce the chance of something going wrong, and it's all about safety at the end of the day. So I can now take this off and connect up. I've cut off my excess. I could have pulled it back, to be honest. That probably would have been a more sustainable way, pulling the cable back so it only got the exact length I needed. But I know I actually need a little bit of this for another job coming up. So I'm going to keep this and then reuse this a little bit for the little terminations that I've got to do. So always thinking ahead and thinking sustainably. Saves you money and it's better for the environment. Now, be mindful when you are doing this part and you're stripping this wire back, because the wire's already in there. I mean, you can take this out. You don't really need it. You can take this out and put your own wiring in there. But if you're going to use it, just be mindful that you don't strip the cable back too far, because remember, you don't want any exposed copper coming out of your terminal strips. So make sure you're measuring it up and being a bit mindful of that. An important thing to remember about your wiring is that this is 2.5 millimeters, that's 1.5 millimeters. You cannot change the size of your wiring in your circuit. Now, I'm not too concerned about this one little bit because I'm going to label this lights only. This is only a lights only circuit. You cannot plug a normal GPO outlet device into this because the cable size is not the correct size. I could have run all of it in 2.5, but at the time, I didn't realize that this is what they were going to do. So be mindful of that. That if you were to change your cable size along the cable run, that is against the rules. And if this is going to be just for lights, it needs to be clearly labeled. It will also be isolated, so people can't make that mistake. Now, generally when you're wiring, you always do the earth first. I'm actually not doing that today, and the reason is because of the way these terminal strips are positioned, I'm actually choosing the wires which is going to be easier to get to. Otherwise, if I put the earth in first, it's kind of everything else is sitting behind it, which makes my life a little bit more awkward. So sometimes you have to just go away from that rule of thumb, but please remember, connecting the earth first is always a good safety habit to get into if you can do it. Okay, I've connected everything up, so that's good. Before I put this on, there's two things I've got to check. Firstly, I need to check the terminations from the factory. You'd be surprised how many times some of these may be loose. So always just double check those, make sure they're nice and tight. Then you need to check the seal. Make sure the seal is sitting in correctly before you mount it on there, because otherwise it's not going to work and it won't be weatherproof. And that's what we're here to do, make sure it's weatherproof. So this seal is actually just popping out a little bit, so I'm going to push it back in, line it up. You may need to do this with your screwdriver because it may just be rubber seal sitting in a bit of a groove. There we go, it's looking a bit better. All right, and now we can mount this onto the mounting block. making sure it's sitting nice and snug. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to write on here light only, so that way no one comes on and plugs anything they shouldn't do. Now we can connect the other end, and then after that it'll be a matter of hooking up the lights, plugging them in, checking to make sure they work. Let's get to it. Okay, here we are back at the adaptable box where I've got the cables out, and we're going to do the termination. Now, before we do this, remember, always do your 7 steps of isolation so that you know that you are safe. Because if I bring my test pen here, and there we go, that's telling me that there are live cables in there. Now I know that there are live cables because I have 2 circuits. I have a power circuit and I have my light circuit. But if I have a look, this wire here should be the one I want. There we go, it's definitely isolated. If I test my testing equipment on something I know it's live, there we go. So you can see I've already done my testing, I've already done my isolating, and I've gone through my procedure, so I know that this is dead. Now, notice when I do that though, every so often it beeps. Now, the problem with that is because this tester tests on EMF, it's basically picking up the magnetic wave, which is picking it up from these other wires. So you really should test with a multimeter. I know that this is disconnected because I've actually physically gone and done it. And I wired it all up, so I know exactly which wire is which. But if you didn't know and you did this, as soon as you hear it beep, then you've got to think either this is faulty, it's picking something else up, it shouldn't do, so check with your multimeter. Your multimeter is the only tool that will guarantee to work for you, as long as you've tested on a known source, of course. Okay, so I'm going to wire this in, put it all back together, and then we just got to hook up the lights. Okay, so now we're up to installing all of the lights around the decking, and we're going to use this. This is just, there it is, this is just some smart lights, and these plug in to the GPO, which we've actually mounted down below here. And all I'm going to do is run the lights underneath this railing, and I'm going to use some cable ties, black cable ties, and I'm just going to cable tie them along on the bars here so it keeps them out of the way, and that way they'll just dangle down and camouflage in and then look fine. And when we turn them on at night time, they should light up all the area around the railing. Very important when we do this not to run our cable ties around the top railing, because that's where people want to put their hands, so we don't want them there. We want to tuck them in and try to keep it as out of sight as possible. So I've measured around the perimeter of the deck because I need to make sure that I get the distance right, because I'm going to have one set of lights going in that direction and the other set of lights going this direction, so they come to the central point which is where our GPO is. So the lights kind of look like this, and basically you have a long lead on this side which goes down to a plug-based transformer. That's what will get plugged into the GPO, and this is the sensor for the remote control. Now these particular lights can be hooked up to Wi-Fi, so this isn't terribly important, but what I want to do is I want to hide this so that it's not obvious when you're standing here. So I've worked it out where I can hide this part behind this post. So we're going to start off, and I want to evenly space all my lights, so I'm going to have the first light about here on this side and then about there on that side, and it should evenly work out all the way around. So I'm just going to cable tie this to the back of this post and then work my way all the way around, cable tying, and that's all there is to it. Now, just like when you're running Conduit, you have to make sure you put sufficient ties on to keep everything in place so that it doesn't come loose or doesn't get knocked over. The rule is when you're cable tying that the cable ties should be no longer than 300 millimeters apart. Or what we used to look at is we used to say hammer handle length apart. So I'm just making sure that's the case, and anywhere where I see the cable might be a little bit slack that needs tightening up because it wants to flex, I just put an extra tie on. Ties aren't worth a lot of money, so don't be stingy on your ties. Put as many ties on as you need. I'm also using a pair of side cutters as opposed to my pliers. If I was doing most work on cable tray or whatever, I would use my pliers. But in this case, my side cutters, because they have more of a chamfered edge for cutting, it allows me to get a closer cut to the end of the tie once I put it through, which is important because if people are going to be putting their hands here, you don't want any sharp edges for them to cut their hands on, which you tend to get when you're cutting with your pliers. So a cable tray that's inside a roof space or in a factory somewhere where no one's going to touch it, it's perfectly fine. But if people are going to come into contact with their hands, then use your side cutters. You can really get in nice and close and make sure there's no sharp edges on the end of those ties. Okay, the job has been completed. I'm not sure if you can see that, but behind me the lights are actually turned on. They're currently glowing red. They are multicolored because they are smart lights. And it's all connected, wired in and working perfectly. Now, just so that you understand exactly what I did with the GPO, is the GPO, as I mentioned earlier, is for the lights only. So they are now permanently switched on the switches. The switches are switched on. The transformers are plugged into the GPO, and I'm controlling the GPO by the switch that we installed in the last episode. So that way it works just as a normal light would work. And it's looking fantastic, really. So that is it for this episode of Electrotechnology on the Job, and I will see you in the next video.